So, if you remember that little previous figure that I showed you, this is the cleaned up version of that. So what the visioning workshop did is it defined 5 major visions, it defined the trends and drivers and major applications, and looked at how they spread across the area. And they also went and said from their experience, what are the technologies and knowledge bases that are necessary. But the most important things are those top level trends and drivers and the vision for photonics. So, one of the other things that came out of the vision workshop is we also identified key sectors within South Africa. Originally there were 7 that were given to the visioning workshop and said, these are the areas that most of the world has looked at and said are the major growth areas for photonics in the world. So you have top there, you have lighting and displays, we have ICT, we have emerging technologies, system sensors and sources, renewable energy, industrial manufacturing, life sciences and health. Now, following the inputs from that first visioning workshop, it was found that if you look at South African photonics sector, the 4 most important areas are those that are listed there in a bit more detail. If you look at lighting and displays in South Africa, and you'll see further when we did the baseline assessment, that's one of the largest areas in South Africa as far as import and export revenue is concerned. But what you find is that we're completely dependent on imports. We import maybe around about 6 to 7 billion rands worth of lighting and displays every year into South Africa. We re-export about 2 billion, so internally we retain about 5 billion rands worth of lighting and displays. But in South Africa, there is nobody that is really looking at the development of products or technologies for that market. We are basically importing, we're using, and that's the end of it. So it's very difficult. If we want to penetrate that market, we have to go up against the LGs, we have to go up against the Samsungs, the Sonys in the world. Are we going to build a display that can compete against them? Or are we going to maybe see if we can develop some other niche technology? Now, if you go look at all the universities and research institutes in South Africa, nobody's really working in lighting and displays at the moment. So if you talk to the people within the community, their feeling is that, yes, it's a very important sector, but it's very difficult for us to penetrate it and to have capabilities in that area. With ICT, the same. You must remember this is a photonics manufacturing technology roadmap. We are a very big user of fibers. Fibers is a very big area in photonics, but locally we are not manufacturing fibers at the moment. 10 years ago we had maybe 2 or 3 companies that were manufacturing, but they've all gone away. They couldn't compete against the international people. So if we have to look at fibers, we have to look and say, but maybe there's application for fibers within the sources side as the development of fiber lasers for specific applications. So ICT as well. You find that there is some areas like University of KwaZulu-Natal, the University of Witwatersrand, that are doing research in those areas, but you find that there is that little chasm of death, valley of death that I was talking about. There's very little transfer of that technology into industry. And if you do transfer it, who's the industry guys that are going to utilize it? Who's going to manufacture your fibers for you? That disconnect is there that we have to address if we don't want to take it forward. Then the other side is emerging technologies. There we're talking about things like LIGO. We're talking about synchronous light sources, things that if we had like $5–6 billion to spend, we could actually participate. But it's very difficult for us with our limited resources to actually go into those areas. So those 4 areas that were identified below were the 4 areas that the people felt that we can really make a significant contribution as far as advanced photonics manufacturing in South Africa is concerned. And the other thing is that I mentioned those 5 little vision things that you got there. You'll see in the presentation as well, there's a lot of detail there, which I'm also not going to go into because otherwise I'm going to be talking here for the next 3 hours. The vision that they came up and they consolidated was this vision that you see over here. So I'm not going to read through it, you can just have a look at it over there, but the most important thing there is the quality of life of society and to support sustainable industrial growth through job creation, skills development and increased revenue. That's the most important thing. Whatever we do over here, and if we take photonics forward, we must be able to create jobs, we must be able to sustain industrial growth in the area, develop skills and increase revenues. I mentioned earlier the baseline assessment, the revenues. So once again, there's a lot of information in the slides. So if you look at South Africa, 2014, we imported 15 billion rands worth of photonics related products, 15 billion. We exported 5 billion rands worth of photonics related products. First time I looked at this thing, I thought, yeah, the market's maybe going to be like 3-4 billion. But when you start counting these things up, and these figures come straight from the South African Revenue Services, Customs and Excise Department. This is figures from them looking at all the photonics-related imports and for the photonics-related exports. This does not include revenue generated locally. It's only import and export. Now, the two large areas that you can see that I mentioned earlier is lighting and displays. And the other large one that has grown is renewables. I see Katessa is like leaning over trying to see. If you look at the exports of photovoltaics, went from almost zero in 2011 to around about 6 billion rand in 2014. The reason for that is the Department of Energy's Renewable Energy Program, where suddenly people started importing all these renewable PV materials to start building the photovoltaic farms and that. Now, in this year, or the last financial year, 2015, it dropped back again to about 4 billion. The reason for that is the first phase of that stopped. But there are going to be subsequent phases. Once again, import, export. We're not really doing much manufacturing locally. We're doing a lot of assembly. But the market for renewables is going to grow in South Africa. We have to go and address that market and see, but can't we develop a locally suited material for photovoltaics? It's a massive market. It's 5-6 billion rands in size per annum. So if you're willing to spend maybe 300 million, maybe 100 million, maybe 200 million, look how much they spend it on SKA. So if we can identify a project that says, let's go ahead and develop a South African PV material. Let's go and see if we can't improve the existing materials. Let's see if we can't develop different materials. We can really develop a local market that will grow, and we'll be able to export those products to the local SADC countries. Export it to Africa, maybe export it even internationally. There's going to be a lot of competition, but we have to make sure that we can develop something that we can really benefit from.